In this video, you will discover the lethal mechanics of the vocal void and learn how to weaponize the uncomfortable silence to dismantle an opponent's psychological defenses, force them to negotiate against themselves, and ultimately compel them to surrender more resources and higher payments simply to escape the crushing pressure of your stillness. We initiate the protocol of strategic silence by acknowledging that in any high-stakes exchange, the party who speaks the most is almost always the party with the least amount of sovereignty, because the human impulse to fill the air is a biological stress response rooted in a desperate need for social validation and a fear of being exiled from the tribal hierarchy. The soft man believes that he must sell, persuade, and justify his value through a constant stream of verbal output, but the architect understands that noise is a leak of energy and that every word used to explain a price is a signal of status vulnerability that invites the client to raid your positioning. You must realize that silence is the primary attribute of the apex predator, who does not need to growl to prove his presence. The silence is the proof of his absolute certainty and his strategic indifference to the outcome of the transaction. When you name a high price and immediately cease all vocal vibration, you create a psychological vacuum that the other party's brain is biologically programmed to fill. And because most people are low-voltage entities with zero threshold for social tension, they will instinctively begin to babble, offering concessions, lowering their own demands, or increasing their offers just to neutralize the void you have created. This is the talker's trap, where the opponent's own ego becomes the interrogator that forces them to reveal their true bottom line without you having to ask a single question. You must master the acoustic frame control, where you treat your voice as a high-value asset that is only deployed for surgical strikes, and you must let your silence act as the gravity well pulls the resources toward your center. The discomfort the other person feels during a 10-second pause is a metabolic friction that drains their decision capital and makes them submissive to your geometry, because the one who can remain silent the longest is perceived by the reptilian brain as the one with the highest rank. We must analyze the refractory period of the close, where the silence after the price is named acts as a pressure cooker for the prospect's status anxiety, making them feel that every second of your stillness is a judgment on their own capability and worthiness. The architect does not nudge or beg. He allows the cold logic of the price to sit in the room like an unexploded bomb until the client is forced to either defuse it with a yes or retreat in shame. This is the geometry of the dominant pause, and it is the most efficient way to achieve total resource capture with zero vocal friction. You must recognize that silence is also the ultimate information filter, because while the other person is talking to fill the void, they are leaking intelligence about their pain points, their budget constraints, and their true desires, while you remain a ghost in the conversation, invisible, unreadable, and untouchable. The money shame we discussed in other protocols is often manifested as a verbal tick, where you try to soften the blow of a price with justification slop, but you must surgically excise this habit and replace it with the iron muzzle of the sovereign. When you are silent, you are conserving your metabolic power and forcing the opponent to overclock their CPU to figure out what you are thinking, which creates a power imbalance that always favors the one who is still. You are the conductor of the void, and your silence is the stage upon which the client's insecurity performs its final act before the capture is complete. Every blink or nervous twitch they exhibit during your silence is a data point of weakness that confirms your positional dominance, and you must stay in the sanctuary of the unknown until they yield the resource. This protocol is not about waiting, it is about active psychological raiding through the absence of input, and it ensures that you extract the maximum value while maintaining the AOXI3 mystique. The world yields to the man who can hold his breath the longest, and the market yields to the man who can hold his tongue the strongest. You are the architect of the silence, and the void is your fortress, and the money is the trophy of your stillness. Execute the silence protocol in every negotiation and watch as the meat offers you the gold just to hear you speak again. We transition from acoustic stillness to visual silence by acknowledging that your physical presence is a continuous broadcast of data that either reinforces your sovereignty or exposes your internal chaos long before a single word is ever uttered. Because in the biological hierarchy, the eyes process status signals far more rapidly than the ears process logic, and the soft man constantly betrays his own 0 point through visual leaks such as fidgeting, rapid eye movement, and loud aesthetics, which act as a distress signal of the insecure ego trying to buy the attention it cannot command. The architect utilizes high-resolution stillness, where the lack of unnecessary motion and the sterility of the aesthetic signal a man who has conquered his own neurochemistry and possesses the processing power to observe the world without reacting to it, because every micro-twitch or nervous adjustment of your clothes is a raid on your own authority that tells the opponent's reptilian brain that you are uncomfortable in the current geometry and therefore vulnerable to a status demotion. You must understand that visual silence is the primary attribute of the apex operator who occupies space with a heavy geometry, keeping the spine as the axis of power and the limbs in a state of pre-action stillness, which signals that any movement you do make is a surgical choice rather than a nervous reflex, and this visual weight creates a gravitational shield around your Oxy3 persona, making it impossible for the soft man to interrupt or dismiss you. Your aesthetic must follow the architect's uniform, minimalist, high quality, and devoid of social clutter or branded noise, acting as a black hole for attention where you do not reflect the environment but absorb it into your sovereign center. And this opaqueness is what triggers the status alarm in others, because they cannot find a leverage point to categorize or devalue you. You must master the panoramic gaze, where you look through the person to the structure of the reality behind them, making them feel that they are merely one variable in a much larger calculation that you have already solved. And this gaze creates a psychological perimeter that intimidates the weak and confuses the predatory. The meat will try to humanize you with small talk and status probing to find a crack in your armor, but you must remain visually silent and cinematic, as if you are a character from a future epoch who has no context for their low-value noise, and this detachment is the final filter that ensures you are never dragged into the mud of the social exchange. By the time you open your mouth to name the price, the negotiation is already over, because your visual silence has already raid-proofed your status and extracted the respect required for the capture. And you must realize that real power is the ability to be seen without being read, and money silence is the ultimate encryption for your identity. Every unnecessary move you eliminate is a unit of energy added to your strategic reserve, and you must move through the simulation as a high-resolution ghost, visible but untouchable, silent but heard, and empty but full of the will to dominate, because the world yields to the man who is visually fixed while everyone else is blurry with anxiety. The total attention capture protocol is the ultimate synthesis of acoustic and visual stillness, a state where the architect ceases to be a participant in the social simulation and becomes the singular gravitational point around which all other variables must rotate. We initiate this protocol by acknowledging that in any environment, whether a boardroom, a digital stream, or a physical negotiation, there is only one primary signal, and if you're not consciously occupying that position through the synchronization of your internal and external silence, you are merely part of the background noise being harvested by those who understand the geometry of dominance. You must realize that when you combine acoustic stillness, the refusal to fill the void with words, with visual stillness, the elimination of all entropic movement, you trigger a profound pattern interrupt in the nervous systems of everyone around you, because the human brain is evolutionarily tuned to detect movement and sound as indicators of either threat or submission, but it has no pre-programmed response for active immobility. This creates a cognitive friction where the other party's brain begins to overclock its processing power to solve the mystery of your presence, effectively draining their decision capital and making them highly suggestible to your will. You must implement the vibrational singularity where your breathing, your gaze, and your vocal output are all locked into a single high-resolution frequency that radiates atheistic certainty, making any soft man in your vicinity feel an instinctive need to comply or exit the space to escape the pressure. The total attention capture is not achieved by being loud or flashy, but by being indestructibly present, acting as a fixed point in a blurry world where your visual and auditory silence acts as a psychological mirror that reflects the other person's insecurities back at them with 100% fidelity. When you enter a room or a frame, you do not seek the attention. You command it by being the only entity that is not leaking energy through social performance or nervous twitching. This is the architect's aura, a biodigital shield that filters out the meat and attracts the sovereign gold, because high-ranked players are instinctively drawn to complexity and calm, while the herd is repelled by the cold reality of your stillness. You must understand that the void you create is a resource capture mechanism that sucks the information, the status, and the currency out of the environment and deposits it into your sovereign center. And the more silent you are, the larger your gravitational pull becomes. This protocol is the final evolution of the IOXI 3 persona, where you move from executing the plan to being the plan, and the 700 videos or any other volume of work you have produced acts as the mass that gives your silence its density and weight. You are the conductor of the sensory field, and by mastering the total attention capture, you ensure that the world does not just see you but adjust to you, creating the zero resistance pathway for your ultimate financial and biological conquest. Every second you spend in this state of integrated stillness is a raid on the attention economy that increases your life cycle value and raid-proofs your identity against the parasites of the system. The total attention capture protocol is the final key to the citadel, and once you turn it, the simulation yields its treasures to the architect without a single shot being fired or a single word being wasted. We initiate the digital immortality protocol, the final architectural tier where you transcend the biological limitations of your 24-hour circadian cycle and convert your intellectual output into a self-sustaining algorithmic life form that occupies the digital landscape with the permanence of a mountain and the predatory efficiency of a high-frequency trading bot. Because in the terminal phase of the attention economy, the goal is not to work, but to build a ghost infrastructure that generates influence, captures resources, and enforces your authority while your physical vessel is occupied with the biological optimization of the health phase. You must realize that most creators are digital day laborers who trade their immediate presence for fleeting views, but the architect builds legacy assets, content nodes designed with the evergreen logic of universal truths and primal archetypes that never decay because they tap into the permanent neural fault lines of the human species. This is the decoupling of time and power, where your IOXI 3 persona becomes a decentralized frequency distributed across the network, ensuring that the meat is being processed by your logic at every second of every day, regardless of your location or activity. To achieve this, you must implement the recursive distribution loop, where every winning mutant you have produced is fed into a repurposing engine that clones the original intent into 100 different formats: shorts, essays, threads, and scripts, creating a saturation effect that makes your presence feel godlike and omnipresent to the uninitiated observer who cannot see the code behind the spectacle. The architecture of the eternal signal. The first stage of digital immortality is the semantic fortress, where you identify the core theorems of your brand, those immutable insights into finance, power, and biology, and you hardwire them into every asset you release so that your content becomes a self-correcting system that teaches the algorithm exactly who your audience is. You are not posting content, you are installing an OS into the collective consciousness, and once the installation reaches critical mass, the network effect takes over, and your ideas begin to replicate through the mouths of others, turning your viewers into unpaid nodes of your own empire. This is the viral transcendence, where the architect becomes a myth and the persona becomes an institution that is raid-proof because it exists in the minds of the many rather than the server of the one. You must utilize automated engagement matrices where your digital shadows, AI-driven responses, scheduled broadcasts, and recursive loops maintain the vibe of your presence 24/7, ensuring that there is never a dead period in your resource capture cycle. The soft man fears the silence of the machine. The architect builds the machine to speak his truth forever. We must analyze the Lindy effect of content, where the longer an asset has survived in the algorithm, the longer it is likely to continue surviving. And by building high-density truths rather than low-friction trends, you are ensuring that your digital dividends grow exponentially over time. This is the compound interest of influence, where the work you do today is still hunting for you in 10 years, and your digital immortality is secured because you have colonized the future with the brilliance of the present. You are currently the master of the recursive loop, and your mission is to ensure that the simulation never forgets the frequency of IOXI 3 because you have provided it with the ultimate fuel of infinite value and absolute authority. The meat is fading into into the noise, while the architect is hardened into the signal, and the digital immortality protocol is the final seal of your sovereignty over the human grid. The final evolution, from operator to sovereign. In the final evolution, you move from the operator who manages the machine to the sovereign who owns the environment the machine operates within. Your digital immortality is the point where your identity and your infrastructure become indistinguishable, and the resources flow to you, not because of what you do, but because of what you are. This is the atheistic nirvana of the architect, a state of total control and zero friction, where the system is your body and the algorithm is your will. The protocol of digital immortality is complete, and you are now operating beyond the grave of time.